Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see about the War of American Independence. Now, England had 13 colonies in America, and each colony had an independent legislator and a governor, and they were appointed by the King of England. The colonists worked so very hard, and through that, they established themselves in the New World, that is in America. And this made them to develop an uncompromising spirit of independence, that is, they wanted to be independent and not under someone. And by the middle of the 18th century, the American colonists all could not tolerate any interference from England in their trade and with the outside world. But Britain still thought that these colonies were there only for the benefit of their mother country, that is Britain. And one thing which irritated all the colonists was the Navigation Act. This act said that all the goods which were coming to the colonies or going from colonies must be carried only in English ships. And all the foreign goods can be imported into the colonies only after they first go to England and then come here. And if they want to export any goods, the ships will go first to England and then only to whichever country they are sending. And the colonists were also stopped. They were prohibited from making things like hat or any woolen or iron goods, because in England the English industries were making all this, and so this will become a competition for them. So they were all prohibited from making all these goods. But since the laws were not very strict, there was a lot of scope of smuggling. But when George the Third was ruling, he set up special courts, and all the people who traded violating these laws, they were all tried, that is, they were punished. And the customs officers were also given the power to enter and search the American homes if there are any smuggled goods there. And this really irritated the people. The 7 Years' War, which took place between England and France from 1756 to 1763, was actually partly fought to protect the interest of the colonist. And therefore, the British government thought that the financial burden which was caused because of this war should be shared with the colonist. So, in 1765, George Greenwell, who was the Prime Minister of Britain, he passed in the Parliament the Stamp Act. And according to the Stamp Act, all the documents, licenses, and wills should be valid and should have stamps affixed on them. This made the colonists to give out a general outcry against the tax. And the day on which the act came into force, the stamps were burnt in the streets of New England, shops were closed, church bells tolled, and flags flew at half mast. This they will do only when there is some death in some place, that is, if a great leader dies. And an American lawyer also argued that there are no representatives from America in the British Parliament. Then why are they asking them to pay the tax? And so they had a popular slogan which said no taxation without representation. That is, if we are representing, if our representative is there in the parliament, then you can even say that taxes are common. But all this is stopped for us. We are prohibited. Then why only tax we have to share? And people like William Pitt in England, they understood the seriousness of the situation, and therefore they also appealed to the parliament to repeal the Stamp Act, and the act was withdrawn in 1766. In 1767, Charles Townshend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he introduced a new series of customs duties on paper, paints, glass and tea. Once again, the people all went into riots, public meetings were held, pamphlets and newspapers were given to everyone with inflammatory leading articles, and the resentment was so strong that in 1769, a group of people, a mob in Rhode Island, burnt the British revenue ship. Seeing this, in 1770, Lord North repealed all duties except that which was on the tea. And the people understood that the government is weak, and the soldiers in Boston were actually the victims of all the insults they had to throw on them. And on a wintry day in 1770, the soldiers fired on the demonstrating crowd, and in that 5 people were killed, and the American newspapers called it the Boston Massacre. In the colonies, the people drank the tea which was smuggled from Dutch. That is, they drank Dutch tea which was smuggled. And in 1773, the East India Company, they had a lot of tea with them. So Lord North allowed the company to sell its tea in America, and they also sold it at a very cheaper rate compared to the smuggled tea. But the Americans thought that this was also an interference in their trade, And so when the ships carrying the company's tree arrived in Boston, the local men, they disguised themselves as Red Indians, and they got into the ships and threw all the tea into the sea, and this event was known as the Boston Tea Party. The British government at once adopted repressive measures. The Boston harbor was closed to trade, and the Charter of Massachusetts was also cancelled. At this time, the colonists felt that it was high time for them to fight for their independence. So, representatives of all the colonies except from Georgia met for the first time in the American history at Philadelphia in 1774. And this gathering was called the First Continental Congress, and it included many distinguished men like George Washington of Virginia. And here they issued a Declaration of Rights and agreed to meet again next year, that is in 1775. Meanwhile, the patriots of the states, they started preparing for the war. The newly appointed governor in Boston, General Gage, he came to know about this preparation of the war and that they were gathering arms at Concord. So immediately he sent his troops to confiscate the arms, that is to take out all the weapons from them. But by the time they came to Concord, the arms had disappeared. So they returned. But while they were returning, they became the target of attack by the colonists. And with this, the American War of Independence had begun. In the beginning, the colonists were not successful. And the important drawback in America was that they did not have a regular army like how Britain had. So the Second Continental Congress met at Philadelphia in 1775, and they organized an army with George Washington as its chief commander. And though the colonial army suffered initially, the soldiers soon gained experience and they started defeating the British army. Therefore, George III hired 20,000 German soldiers to fight the rebels. Enraged by this, the Congress met again at Philadelphia and issued the unanimous Declaration of Independence on 4th July 1776, and this declaration was drawn up by Thomas Jefferson. And in the same year, the American army under Washington defeated the English army in Trenton and at Princeton, and a year later, in October in 1777, the English army under Burgoyne was forced to surrender at Saratoga. In 1778, France joined the American side. And in 1780, the British began to win a series of victories in the South, even beyond South Carolina. But in 1781, the British General Cornwallis was forced to surrender to the American army at Yorktown. The last blow came when other European countries like Spain and Holland, they also joined with America, and Russia and other powers, they together formed an armed neutrality against Britain. The most important reason for the defeat of the British was that the British government had to conduct its campaigns from 3,000 miles away. And normally it took at least 3 months for one message to come and receive the answer across the Atlantic. Second, the area of fighting was large and the British soldiers had very little experience of warfare in colonial conditions. And another thing which accounted for the British defeat was the fact that Lord North, who was the Prime Minister of England at that time, was not that very competent to manage the situation. And the European forces, particularly France, turned against Britain, and this was a great blow for Britain. Above all, the colonists were able to find in George Washington one of the outstanding leaders of modern times. And therefore, a peace treaty was signed in 1783 at the Palace of Versailles in France, and there George III recognized the independence of the American colonies. This American Revolution brought into existence a great new nation and a government which claimed to represent the will of the people and not the wishes of a king. The French soldiers who came and fought on the American side took this idea of a representative government to their continent, where kings ruled as representatives of God on earth. The leaders of the French Revolution, which broke out in another 6 years, drew their inspiration for their course of action from the American example. The American Revolution had its impact on British politics also. The autocratic king and the selfish politicians of the aristocracy were not allowed to have the monopoly of power. Their handling of the American problem was an eye-opener to the common people. It was evident that they aristocrats were first and foremost concerned only about keeping themselves in power, and they were not at all interested in the well-being of the common man. And people were convinced that any improvement in their lot in life depended only in their active participation in the administration of the country. So they started agitating for parliamentary reform, and this is what I have to say about the War of American Independence. If you have anything more to add on to what I've said, Please write it in the comment box, like the video, share it with your friends, and if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe and support. Thank you.